Hey everybody, Caleb here, and today I'm going to be covering how to edit professional portraits just like this, exactly how I took the colors looking like this and turned it into this. So I'm going to start from scratch with you all and explain in detail each one of these functions, okay? If you're ready, let's get into it. So first what you're going to do is you're going to get this application, Adobe Lightroom Classic. Okay, you do need a paid subscription to actually edit with this, but what you can do is use the application version if you don't have a subscription to this software. It's basically the Adobe suite that you'll need, and it's really helpful. It has everything that you need in terms of editing equipment. I mean, Adobe has Photoshop, After Effects. They are the place to go in terms of actually, getting these programs to use. So once we've got this open, what we'll want to do is click File, New Catalog. We're going to be creating a new catalog because you want to keep everything saved in its own file. So I'm going to name this video, and then it's going to close and relaunch with this new Lightroom catalog, which basically stores your pictures in this catalog. Okay, so each one of these catalogs is how you can keep organized and then edit. Like if somebody requests a change to an edit, you can open the catalog, and then instead of starting from scratch again, you can edit from where you left off and make a minor adjustment. It'll save you a lot of time if you do that. What you're going to want to do first is go to the Library tab. There's a few tabs at the top. Library and Develop are mostly where you're going to be working. So Library is where you actually pull in photos. Develop is where you're going to be editing the photos. To import a photo, just click the Import button in the bottom left, and after that, it will pull up some pictures. Now, at this point, you can drag and drop your pictures in there. So I'm just dragging and dropping this photo and clicking Import. Once you import your pictures, it's going to appear in that library, and you can go over to the Develop. If you don't see any photos down here ever, all you need to do is click right here and change it to all photographs instead of what you had previously imported, which is the default setting. So there you go. Here's my base image, and I'm going to be showing you all exactly my process of what I go through to edit these photos whenever I'm editing portraits. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look over here on the left. The basic editing tab is where we're going to start, and we're going to slowly work our way down to cover all of these effects here. So we're going to start in basic editing. It's things like exposure, temperature, highlight, shadows. All of this are things that are going to be considered basic categories for every photo inside Lightroom. So this is considered the white balance, and the white balance really makes a huge difference in the picture. I see that from this, you'll see that the temperature is 9,300, and the higher it is, the warmer the photo gets, and the lower it is, the colder. That's why you can see there is a blue end and a yellow end of this slider. And when we move it, you'll see that it changes quite a bit. So a lot of people get in here and they start really moving this temperature up and down too much. The thing that you have to remember is that this is very sensitive, and you only want to move it just a little bit. So I personally like at about 8,970 where it was. This looks perfect for me because there's nowhere in the photo where it's too warm or too cold. Okay, so Now we can move on to the tint. And the tint is the same thing. You'll see there's a green side and a purple side of this. And I'm just going to mess around with it until I get to a spot that I like. Okay, so I'm liking the look of this tint because it gives it kind of like feeling to the grasses around where she is. And now we're going to move to the exposure. So exposure, you want to highlight the things that are important in the picture. So for example, if you want somebody to focus on the subject of the photo, you want that to be the perfect exposed spot, which would be her skin, her face, her shoulders. That's where the exposure is really good. Now, a lot of people actually forget to make sure that this part at the top is not as exposed when they increase the exposure. But for this picture, I'm mostly focusing on her skin here. And I do see that it's a little too dark, so I'm going to increase this just barely, okay? So same with this, it's very sensitive, okay? So this is looking like a better skin tone to me. But you'll notice that it kind of overexposes the top part. Now the good thing about this is that I've actually shot the photo in RAW, so I still have that data in the picture and I can adjust it later. So that's why it's important to always shoot in RAW. And I do like actually editing in high contrast, so I'm going to increase the contrast for this picture quite a bit. Okay, so the contrast is looking really good here. You can see more definition in her features, and that's what I was trying to bring out with the contrast. So you'll see that the picture's not looking amazing right now, but as we continue to go down, you'll see where all of this plays. And it gets really powerful when we actually get to the colors aspect of this. Now I'm going to continue down to the highlights and the shadows. The highlights are this spot here, like her face, and then the shadows are these dark spots in the picture. Okay, so for the highlights, what we're going to do is actually bring them down because they're kind of too much at this moment. So if we bring this up, you see it makes the exposure higher. And if we bring down, then the highlights in the picture actually come back. So you see how there's so much more richness when I bring that down. So I'm going to put the highlights at around minus 18. And then the shadows, I'm going to also move down just a little bit as well. So I'm going to put that at minus 8, exactly where I like that. The whites and the blacks, I don't really mess with the whites and the blacks because it's going to come important later on when we're messing with the tone curve for those whites and blacks to be as they're supposed to be. For this image, I'm just going to increase the saturation just a little bit. So just a quick note on the saturation and vibrance. Vibrance adjusts the cool colors and saturation adjusts the warm colors. So if you'll see here, then the vibrance is mainly only affecting it looks like it's affecting the yellows, but there's not many cool colors in this picture. Whereas if I adjust the saturation, it really adjusts the reds. So you want to be careful with both of these and not increase them too much, okay? Because it's very obvious when people are beginners, they like to increase the saturation like this, and that just is looking always so bad. It's a huge red flag. Like, do not ever do this in your pictures because it ruins the picture. We're going to fix individual colors later when we get into the color section. For the tone curve, you're going to want to put a few places into this so that you can edit it very slightly. So the first thing that you're going to do is go to the middle and put on a spot right in the middle as you need it. And then you put one right there and right here, okay? So this is a great like starter spot of where we can then adjust each one of these. So what we're going to do is go to the top. This is actually editing the highlights in the images on this side. Oops. And I need to get rid of that, so you can right click and select delete. So we're trying to adjust this small spot right here. We're going to be bringing it slightly down, okay? And this is a great way to really enhance your photos, is to bring this slightly down. And then after that, we're going to put another spot right here and then move these slightly down again and take this final one and we're going to move it up, okay, to where it looks like this. And this is adjusting the dark parts of the image. You'll see in the histogram right here, this is the dark parts and this is the lighter parts. So on this side, we're actually editing the darker parts. And then what I'm doing by right here is I'm bringing up the balance in this picture and adding like less contrast to the dark parts of the image, okay? Okay, so I'm just gonna adjust this really quickly to my preference. All right, so right about there is perfect. Okay, so it's still looking a little funny here. So we want to make sure that it looks really good. Okay, so yeah, you want to basically have like kind of an S curve, but this one is without the S at the top, and it kind of has this tail going up at the end. And you'll really see a difference with the tone curve in these black parts of the image. Okay. All right, so we're done with the tone curve. We're going to move on to the HSL. And HSL means hue, saturation, and luminance. And it's for the colors, okay? So instead of looking at all of them all at once and kind of being overwhelmed, what we're going to do is click into each individual. Now, a quick point on this is the reds is what really usually affects like people's lips in the image and any other red colors. And the orange and yellow are what really affect the skin tone. So orange especially really affects the skin tone. You'll see only her skin is adjusting here. Whereas if I use the reds, only her lips are actually changing color. So it's important to note that and understand where the photo is actually being adjusted when you're changing these colors. You only want to focus on the part that is adjusted by the hue, saturation, and luminance. So for the red, I'm going to usually bring the red slightly more to the red side, and then the right side is the orange side. So you'll see if I move this, her lips get less red, and if I move it down, then they get more red. Okay, so I'm gonna move this to around where her lips start to look kind of natural, and then from here I'm going to turn the saturation just a little bit down because I don't want them to look too red either. So that's looking pretty natural to me. And I'm going to actually make them pop a little bit by increasing the luminance. So they look like the sun's kind of like brushing against her lips. So I'll move the luminance up, which is kind of like the highlights or the brightness of that. That's what luminance stands for. So now that that's finished, I'm going to move on to the orange aspects, which, as I said before, is focused on her skin tone. So in this image, I'm going to adjust the hue, and it's kind of like you're moving this around to your preference. So a lot of people like adjust it way too much or way too little, but you have to keep in mind that these are very fine adjustments, and the smallest change makes a huge difference. If I go to the plus side, she looks too green, but if I move back a little bit just to like the -10, the skin tone starts to look really natural, exactly as it did the day that I took the picture. It looks really nice. So I'm going to increase the saturation just a little bit because, as you'll see, you don't want her looking like a ghost either. So we're going to increase the saturation of her skin to a little bit around like +12 is perfect. And the luminance, we're going to increase that because it's more natural to her skin tone, okay? So now that I turned up the saturation, I want to also turn up the luminance here so that it brings that natural look back to the skin. So now her skin is looking a lot better, guys. And I'm going to move on to the yellows in the photo, okay? So the yellows are usually part of the skin, but also usually like grass is considered yellow as well. If you move the hue, you can actually see what it's adjusting. So for this one, I really do not like the green look. What I'm going to be doing is moving it downward to bring back the richness of the photo in the surrounding greenery. Okay, so I'm going to put this at about -26, and you'll start to see the photo come to life around this spot because the colors really do make a huge difference when you're adjusting this. Adjusting the colors individually is what really makes your work stand out. If you can have a really good handle on how you want the colors to look and then adjust them individually, the hue, saturation, and luminance, it's going to take you to the next level with your work, and just understanding the fact that you can individually edit each one of these colors, okay? So now for the saturation of the yellows, I'm going to bring that a little bit down because I'm seeing some too much saturation in some of these green aspects coming in. So I want her to be the primary focus of this image, right? And if I'm putting a lot of focus on the green around her, she won't be the primary focus. Instead, the distractions of the green will be coming into the photo. So right about -50 is perfect, it looks like to me, because it's making the image more monochrome and more focused specifically on a few colors. I found that if you have all of the colors super saturated, it kind of pushes away from the photo. Whereas if you only highlight certain colors with the saturation, it really makes certain parts of the photo really pop. So that's why I've done that with the yellows and pull that back. As well as with the luminance, like here you'll see it's actually getting too overexposed like it was before. I don't want to do that to this image. Instead, I'm going to put it back just a few spots at -6 right here, okay? And then we're going to keep moving on. Now we're into the green color, and you'll see by moving this that it does affect some of the photo. Let's see. It's kind of hard to see what this affects sometimes, and that means that there isn't much green actually in this. But I'm just going to move it a little bit back because I don't like a lot of green in my images, as well as the saturation. I'm going to move it back, but it doesn't really make much difference because there aren't any green tones being highlighted here and actually adjusted. Now we're moving on to the aqua. And again, we're going to just see if any of this is adjusted. So I'm seeing a slight change in this based on the aqua colors. Again, there isn't much aqua, so we can just basically turn down the green and move it a little bit that way, okay? All right, now we're moving on to the blues here. And the blues, I don't know if there is any in this picture either. No, there's not many blues. So we can just keep it at 0 for this. Yeah. So we'll just keep the colors at 0 if there isn't any in it. And now for the purple, again, there is not much purple. And the magenta. Again, not much magenta. So you'll really see there is a change that we did. You see a big difference here with just the color adjustments that we made. But we only adjusted a few of the colors, and that made a huge difference in this picture. If I zoom in, you'll be able to see that. So it looks so much more rich, and it's just looking very natural, the colors in this picture. Something that I like to do is also crop the photo to where the subject is perfectly in center. Sometimes you want it to be in center, sometimes you don't, but for this picture, it makes a lot of sense for it to be in center. So what I'll do is just make sure that her head and her shoulders are perfectly aligned, and then I'll click the crop tool, move this slightly to where it's perfectly aligned, and then click done. There you go. And I move that a little bit too much over. There you go. Now it's looking like really centered here. So always crop your images and make sure there's one tool in the crop that's awesome, which is the angle. If something's not centered right, the angle can really make a big difference. You can click the straighten tool to straighten this, and then if you find something to straighten it with, you just put it across like a hard edge and then click done there. Okay, so you can see it's slightly straightened now a little bit more. Okay, so moving on, we're going to go to split toning. Okay, I'm just gonna close these so it doesn't distract you all. So split toning is really cool. It basically adjusts the colors of the highlights and the shadows. So you'll see here there's a highlight one and there's a shadow, and the hue is what color is infused into the highlights, and saturation is how much of that color is showing up. And then the shadows is the same for the shadows. So the hue in the shadows and then how much saturation of that hue is appearing in the shadows. So for me, I always like to use a certain color in the highlights. And this is a great way to basically stylize your work. So you'll see a huge difference whenever I add in a saturation to the hue. So see how this small adjustment made a big difference in terms of like the overall look and feel of the image. It made a big difference. It brought some green, because right now I'm into the greens. Now, actually, what I like to bring in is kind of like a yellow tone to most of my images. So I'm moving it right here at 50, and it puts this awesome yellow tone. And then also for the saturation, if you bring that way too up, it's going to really ruin the photo. But instead, I like to keep it at about 20, and that just makes a small adjustment to the highlights. If you see it, you see that in like the back part, it really makes a small adjustment in those highlights. So same for the shadows, we're going to first move the saturation to about 20 to see what's going to adjust and what color it is. And then at this point, we're going to move it to the color that we would like to be in the shadows. And I like a slight teal kind of, or usually a slight teal, but actually for this image, I'm not really liking that look. So I'll move over into the purples, which is more like a complementary color to that orange, okay? So just around 259, is exactly what I'm kind of looking for this look and feel. And it's obviously too saturated in that shadow, so I'm just going to move that down to about half of where it was. So right here at saturation of 10 and the hue of around a purple is perfect. Again, it's a very minor adjustment, but you'll see that in those greens and in her skin tone, you'll see a slight adjustment. These fine things that really are very like small adjustments, they make a big difference in how your photo turns out and what people think about your picture, okay? So now we're moving on to the details, and the details is basically how the photo looks in terms of like the sharpness of the image. And this image is sharp and her skin is basically flawless, but what we want to do is bring up the sharpness. And the reason being is because on Instagram, the photo will be reduced in this file size. It's not going to pull in every single pixel that is in this photo right now. So we'll want to sharpen the image to where when we export it to Instagram, it'll look sharper than it did before. Okay, so I'm going to increase the sharpness quite a bit to around like 72 is perfect. And it brings out some of her features a little bit more. And then you'll also want to adjust the radius of this to about 1.9 or so. And it just makes it a lot stronger when you adjust the radius, okay? So when I look at this, it looks a little bit too strong. So I'm just going to bring it right back to 1.6, okay? So always be like double checking your edits and finally adjust what exactly is being changed. And then in terms of the detail, we'll want to bring it up a little bit and bring a little bit more detail into that image, okay? So right at about 42 looks perfect to me. For the noise reduction here, it's really going to make a big difference, as well as the color reduction. These both will make a large difference. So I'm going to put this at about 20 and the details at 50, the contrast at around 11, 10 or 11 is fine. And then the color, you're going to want to turn that up, and it'll really make this the image a lot smoother whenever you increase the color. Okay, so I'm about 72. And we're going to turn the detail up just slightly, okay? So that's how you adjust this photo. The lens correction, the transformation, there are like both of these and the calibration you can adjust, but these basically adjust the same things that we did in the past with all the other colors. So I actually have already adjusted this how I want it to be. And now I'm going to basically add a little bit of grain to the picture. About 10. You'll see the difference whenever I take it on or off. So if I increase it a lot, there's more grain in it, and there's none. But I want it to be very, very slight. Okay, so at this point, we're pretty much done with the edit. Now, there's definitely something you can do that will really bring up a lot more richness to this picture. And a lot of people don't know this part about editing, but a friend of mine taught me this, and you all are going to be blown away whenever I implement this change. So right here is called the adjustment brush. It allows you to change specific parts of the image that you're not going to be editing otherwise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these top parts, which is too overexposed. I'm going to adjust that exposure and bring it down, as well as bring the highlights down on that too. So if you remember in the past with the other part, when I took the highlights down, it made the photo look way better. So again, if we bring this exposure down a little bit, and then the highlights down, it brings back so much richness. And I see I made a little bit of a mistake. So I'm going to hold Alt and unselect part of her face where I added too much shadowing. Okay, you can add a little bit of temperature to this and bring the highlights down, increase the contrast a little bit. All right. Now the photo is looking really good. At this point, you want to make some small adjustments back in the basic setting. You can, for example, increase the exposure a little bit, like very slightly. So by that I mean like make it 80.80. I mean, and other than that, this is a finished picture at this point. We can turn the vibrance up a little bit. And the last thing that I usually do is just kind of adjust the curves again to make sure it's exactly as I want. So from start to finish, you'll see the edit here. Finally, if there are any blemishes, then you can go to this part, spot removal tool, and you can adjust the size to make this really quick, small, and go here, and you'll see that it removes any of these blemishes straight away. So like right there. You can actually move where it's pulling the information from. You'll see whenever I go over this that it removes this mole on her face. And now there is no longer one. Okay guys, so that's how from start to finish how I edit my photos. There's a large difference in this picture from before and after. And I encourage you all to go try out all of these tips and tricks with your own photos in Lightroom. Basically, you'll just want to adjust each one of these until it's exactly how you like the look of it. At this point, what you do is you click on the right hand side, click this presets section, and click create preset. And then you can name this whatever you want. Click create. And now if I reset, you'll see, now if I actually reset this image and I apply the Nicole preset, it looks exactly as it did before. Okay. There you go. The final thing that you'll want to do is go to File, Export, and you choose the folder. So there's a few things that I should talk to you about. This is the export location, the file naming. This is if you have video, and everything else is not very important. So export location is where it's actually going to be. We're going to choose a specific folder. In the folder, we're going to click choose and go to your photography folder, create a new folder if you need to, and then after that, select that folder. You can rename it if you need to, just by putting what you're going to name it here. And then we're going to say JPEG. We're going to either put the quality up to 100, or what I like to do is limit that file size, because we don't want it too big whenever we're transferring it to our phone. I don't want to take too much storage space up. So I'm going to limit this to 4,000 kilobytes, which is basically 4 megabytes. And you click export. At the top right, you'll see it exporting. Until that's finished, I would keep your Lightroom Classic open. But this is step by step exactly what I do to edit my portraits. I hope that you all enjoy this, and I hope that you all learned something from it. Super excited for you all to show me the pictures that you also take. And if you all would like, you can actually share the images in our Facebook group. So if you ever edit a photo, you really like what you did, go to the Master Photography with Bleach Film Support and Learning Hub Facebook group. Right in here, you can share your photos. Just click right here, upload your photos, say, hey everybody, and you can click this button to add these pictures in, at which point you should share your work, share your Instagram here, and then we're going to be looking at your photos. So that's a great way to share your photos that you edit with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and learn with me, and I'm excited to see what you all do and what kind of edits you all create.